Okay, just remembered what I wanted to say. I couldn't remember the line. The title of this talk is Remember Death, for we perish so quickly. And that's a line from one of our prayers that we recite. And it's kind of hard to, there's a lot of ways to approach this topic, but the way I want to start with is thinking about what we do every morning when we wake up. We say, may I do no harm, may I help sentient beings, and may I develop the mind of awakening. And then we enter our day, and then I find for myself that my mind can be quite reactive at times. And so in my practice, I've focused on things, some practices that help me with that. And what I realized during this retreat, that some of those things are a little too subtle for off the cushion for me at this point. But, and I'm aware that from my own experience that there have been times living here at the Abbey where I would choose to be a little depressed in the years, some years ago. And I talked to Venerable about this, and she'd say, well, can you choose to not do that? And then it was hard to get out. But I did it for a reason. Sometimes I would do it intentionally, and it actually was helpful for my mind for one thing, but then for some years I've realized, well, that's not the best way to do this. It helps me in a certain way, but it's not the way to go about what I was trying to achieve, which was not being so reactive to others, not being so impulsive in responses to certain kind of situations. And so what I was working on in my practice, I decided it was too subtle. And so I was thinking about this, and I was recalling how it's helped me so much. Some other practices I've done which make the mind sober, like the body contemplations, they make the mind quite sober. And for me, that isn't it has nothing to do with depression or despondency or anything. There's no flavor in my mind like that. In fact, I find that to be quite a helpful mind where it's easy for me to appreciate things more. I think what I had to work against was, what in particular many years ago, what I had difficulty with was having a joyful mind and then reacting to things around me and watching it crash. I find that to be actually the most painful thing, and it makes me have some understanding of what they describe for the God realm. Like that is the greatest suffering, being in this God realm where everything is just, so blissful. But then knowing you're going to fall and watching that. I found that experience in living here maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, actually quite a challenge to deal with. I couldn't quite deal with my mind watching it crash. So it's something I've worked with for a long time. And so this winter, I had been working on this thing and decided it was too subtle, and realized that for myself, it's kind of like what Jeffrey taught us. Remember when he taught us this thing about how the mind and the mental factors work, like there's all these flashlights, lights shining into a box, and you have the primary consciousness and various mental factors that are going, and they all blend. But the one that is predominant is the one that's going to color everything else. And so I find that if I set up the conditions of like, what is the state of my mind? And I set up the conditions in a way, like, the only way I can describe this is like, most of us have experienced like grief or depression or these kind of moods that just hang, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, they color everything, right? But those aren't very, well, grief I think can be quite healthy, but depression is not a very healthy mind. So for me, this mind that's sober is actually quite a good mind for me to have, because, and how do I get my mind to that place? And so I think for me, that's why the contemplation of the immediacy of death is so helpful, because it puts my mind in a mind that's sober, and it carries with it a perspective that's in line with the Dharma. A mind that's, say, depressed or some other things actually isn't a very realistic mind in a lot of ways. It's coloring things in a way that aren't, they don't carry optimism. They don't carry hope. They don't carry things that are going to propel you. Whereas if I have my mind like this kind of sober, like, well, maybe I should think about this day and what could come up. And I have that kind of state of mind, this awareness of like, I have no idea if I'll be here this afternoon. You know, things like that. Then when something happens, I'm not coming from this, like, from a lot of other states of mind that get me into trouble. Let's put it that way. And so this is what I was, when I read about this, I realized that, wow, this is what it will be like when we realize emptiness. It will be a different mind, but it'll be one that colors everything, like the illusion-like appearance. You'd be walking around, and instead of being so reactive of everything, you would be like, wow, this is like, there's like myriad causes and conditions that are bringing this forth. There's nothing here to reify, and you would just move through your day potentially. I mean, as you can imagine, it would be quite different. The reactivity that we have would be like gone. But that's a ways away, so we need something before that. And so basically, why does the mind get so reactive? It's because we're like always just responding to essentially the 8 worldly concerns, like our attachment to things and our aversion to things. And the actual antidote to that is to consider our potential for death, the immediacy of our death. And so when I used to read these things like, you know, if you don't think about death in the morning, you'll waste your morning. You know, all that sounded like it was just on paper for me. But this idea of how that would look, for me, it's more like a thing of like, what is the state of my mind that I want to take through the day? And what is it I can use that will bring me back to a place where that I can have a really different perspective on the things that come up. And I think for me, that is the great benefit of this contemplation that we do. And so the next time, maybe I would like to talk about Lama Tsongkhapa's ideas about this. He talks about the 6 disadvantages if we don't do this. And for 5 of them, I can see them quite clearly in my practice. So I think that it adds fuel to this notion of considering, you know, like what are the advantages and disadvantages of this contemplation. So, thank you.